What's new in the record business? Have you brought a new sound to it?
No new sound. I have a hard enough time railing over the old one.
The story of Phil Spector is one that begins with brilliance and innovation, but gradually descends into a darkness that few could have imagined during the height of...
Remember today, we're here because someone died. Now, what does he got to say that for? He's just a mean son of a bitch who doesn't...
his fame. Known as the architect of the legendary wall of sound, Spector revolutionized the music industry, crafting rich...
The first time I saw Ike and Tina Turner, I know everybody did, it was the Ike and Tina Turner review. Whatever happened to the word review? You understand? MC Hammer would be served well to use that, the MC Hammer review. Very good. And whatever happened to the name?
Layered productions that transformed popular music and influenced generations of artists. His work with groups like the Ronettes and the Righteous Brothers, along with iconic recordings such as Be My Baby, cemented his place as one of the most influential producers of the 20th century. To the outside world, he was a genius, eccentric, perhaps, but undeniably brilliant. Yet behind the accolades and groundbreaking achievements lay a far more troubling reality, one that would only come fully into view years later. Even during his rise to prominence, there were whispers, stories of erratic behavior, controlling tendencies, and an intensity that often crossed a line into intimidation. Artists who worked with him spoke of long, grueling recording sessions, of an atmosphere that could shift from creative exhilaration to fear in an instant. Spector demanded perfection, but his methods were often extreme, fueled by a need for control that extended beyond the studio. His relationship with Ronnie Spector, the lead singer of the Ronettes, would later reveal a deeply troubling pattern of manipulation and isolation. What had once appeared to be a glamorous partnership slowly unraveled into a story of emotional confinement, where control replaced affection and fear overshadowed love today as the years passed. Spector's behavior grew increasingly unpredictable. The same intensity that had driven his creative genius began to manifest in darker ways. Reports surfaced of paranoia, volatile outbursts, and an obsession with power that extended into his personal life. Those who encountered him often described an unsettling presence, a sense that beneath the surface of his eccentric persona was something far more unstable. His reclusive lifestyle only added to the mystery as he withdrew further from the public eye, surrounding himself with an aura of secrecy that made it difficult to separate myth from reality. Despite these warning signs, his legacy in the music world remained largely intact for decades. His influence was undeniable, and his contributions continued to be celebrated, even as questions about his character lingered in the background. It was a stark contrast, the beauty of the music he created set against the growing unease about the man behind it. For many, it was easier to focus on the art than to confront the complexities of the artist, to separate the two in a way that allowed his achievements to remain untarnished. But that separation became impossible in the early hours of February 3rd, 2003, when actress Lana Clarkson was found dead in Spector's mansion. The news sent shockwave through both Hollywood and the music industry, bringing long-simmering concerns about his behavior into sharp, unavoidable focus. What followed was a legal battle that would expose the darker aspects of his life in chilling detail. Testimonies painted a picture of a man who had become increasingly consumed by his own instability, whose need for control had escalated into something far more dangerous. The trial that followed was as complex as it was disturbing, revealing not just the events of that night, but a broader pattern of behavior that had gone largely unaddressed for years. Witnesses spoke of similar encounters, of moments where Spector's actions had crossed boundaries, where his presence had inspired fear rather than respect. The courtroom became a space where the myth of Phil Spector, the genius producer, the visionary artist, collided with the reality of a man whose personal demons had spiraled out of control. In 2009, he was convicted of second-degree murder, a verdict that marked a definitive turning point in how the world would remember him. The sentence that followed ensured that he would spend the remainder of his life behind bars, a stark contrast to the heights of fame and influence he had once enjoyed. It was a fall as dramatic as any in modern cultural history, a reminder how quickly the narrative of a life can shift when the truth comes to light. Yet even in the aftermath, the story of Phil Spector remains deeply complex. His contributions to music cannot be erased, nor can the impact he had on the artists who followed in his footsteps. But neither can the darker aspect of his life be ignored. The challenge lies in reconciling these two realities, in understanding how someone capable of creating such beauty could also be responsible for such profound harm. It is a question that has no easy answer, one that continues to provoke debate and reflection. Looking back, it becomes clear that the signs were always there, hidden beneath the surface, overshadowed by his success and the cultural significance of his wealth. The truth about Phil Spector is not a simple revelation, but a gradual unmasking, a process of confronting uncomfortable realities and acknowledging the full scope of his legacy. It is a story that forces us to grapple with the complexities of human nature, to recognize that brilliance and darkness can coexist in ways that are both fascinating and deeply unsettling. That in the end, the legacy of Phil Spector is one that cannot be easily defined. It is a legacy of innovation and influence, but also of caution and consequence. It serves as a reminder that the stories we celebrate are often more complicated than they appear, and that the truth, when fully revealed, can be far darker than we ever imagined. As the years unfolded following conviction of Phil Spector, the full weight of his story began to settle into public consciousness, no longer framed solely by his groundbreaking achievements, but by the unsettling duality that defined his life. The myth of the musical genius could no longer stand untouched. It had been irrevocably altered by the reality of his actions. Yet what made his story even darker was not just the crime itself, but the growing realization that the warning signs had been present all along, scattered throughout decades of behavior that had often been dismissed as eccentricity or artistic temperament. Those who revisited his earlier years began to see them through a different lens. The intense control he exerted in the studio, once celebrated as a mark of perfectionism, now appeared more ominous. The stories shared by Ronnie Spector about isolation, fear, and emotional manipulation gained new significance, no longer viewed as isolated incidents but as part of a broader pattern. Her accounts painted a chilling picture of life behind closed doors, of locked gates, constant surveillance, and a relationship defined not by partnership but by dominance. What had once been whispered in interviews now echoed loudly in the wake of his conviction, forcing the world to confront a truth it had long overlooked. In reassessing his legacy, attention also turned to the culture that had allowed such behavior to persist. The music industry, enamored with his genius, had often turned a blind eye to his darker tendencies. Collaborators, executives, and even fans were drawn to the brilliance of his work, sometimes at the expense of acknowledging the human cost behind it. This complicity, whether intentional or not, became part of the larger narrative, a reminder that talent can sometimes shield individuals from accountability, at least for a time. The night of Lana Clarkson's death became not just a singular tragedy, but a turning point that forced a reckoning. Details from the trial continued to reverberate, with testimonies describing similar encounters that hinted at a pattern of behavior stretching back years. The image of Spector as merely eccentric or misunderstood could no longer hold. Instead, it gave way to a far more troubling portrait. A man whose need for control and whose instability had escalated unchecked, culminating in irreversible consequences. Even within prison, the contradictions of his character persisted. Reports describe a figure who remained isolated, still clinging to elements of the persona he had cultivated for decades. There was little indication of the creative force that had once reshaped the sound of popular music. Instead, there was a sense of a life that had collapsed inward, consumed by its own excesses and unresolved turmoil. It was a stark and sobering image, one that stood in sharp contrast to the vibrant, expansive soundscapes he had once created. For many, the question remained, how should Phil Spector be remembered? Can the art be separated from the artist, or are they forever intertwined? His influence on music is undeniable, his innovation still studied and celebrated. Yet the darkness of his personal life casts a long shadow, one that complicates any attempt to view his work in isolation. It is a tension that continues to spark debate, forcing audiences to grapple with the uncomfortable reality that brilliance and brutality can coexist within the same individual. The deeper truth about Phil Spector lies not just in the details of his crime, but in the broader story of how it came to be overlooked for so long. It is a story about power, about the dangers of unchecked authority, and about the ways in which society can sometimes excuse or ignore troubling behavior when it is accompanied by extraordinary talent. It challenges us to reconsider how we define greatness, and at what cost it is achieved. That as the narrative continues to be examined, one thing becomes increasingly clear. The legacy of Phil Spector cannot be neatly categorized. It is neither purely a story of genius nor solely one of tragedy, but a complex and deeply unsettling combination of both. His life serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder that behind even the most celebrated achievements can lie truths that are far darker than we are prepared to confront. And in facing those truths, we are forced not only to reevaluate him, but to reflect on the systems and perceptions that allowed his story to unfold as it did that in the years after his story reached its final chapter. The legacy of Phil Spector became something that could no longer be discussed without confronting its contradictions in full. His death in 2021, while serving his sentence, closed the door on any possibility of personal redemption or further explanation, leaving behind only the fragment of a life that continues to provoke both admiration and unease. For many, it was not a moment of closure, but of reflection, a point at which the full weight of his actions and influence had to be considered together, without the possibility of separation. What makes his story even darker in retrospect is the realization that it was not a sudden fall, but a slow, unfolding descent that had been visible in pieces for decades. The eccentricities that once seemed harmless, even fascinating, began to take on a more sinister tone when viewed through the lens of everything that followed. Stories that had been dismissed or minimized, accounts of intimidation, erratic behavior, and an obsession with control, now appeared as clear indicators of something far more serious. It raises uncomfortable questions about how such signs are interpreted and why they are so often overlooked when attached to individuals of immense talent or influence. The music he created remains, echoing through time with the same power and emotional depth that first captivated audiences. Songs like Be My Baby continue to be celebrated, studied, and cherished, their beauty undiminished by the darkness of their creator's story. Yet listening to them now carries a different weight. For some, the knowledge of what lies behind the music alters the experience entirely, making it impossible to separate the sound from the man who shaped it. For others, the art retains its independence, standing as a testament to a creative force that existed alongside, but not defined solely by his personal actions. The broader cultural conversation surrounding his legacy reflects this divide. Historians, critics, and fans continue to debate how his contribution should be remembered, and whether it is possible or even appropriate to celebrate his work without acknowledging the harm associated with his life. This ongoing discussion extends beyond Spector himself, touching on larger questions about accountability, the nature of genius, and the responsibilities that come with influence. His story has become a case study in these debates, a powerful example of how difficult it can be to reconcile greatness with wrongdoing. The tragedy of Lana Clarkson remains at the center of this narrative, a stark and irreversible moment that transformed public perception and forced a reckoning that had long been avoided. Her life, often overshadowed in discussions of the case, stands as a reminder of the human cost behind the headlines, a cost that cannot be ignored or minimized. In remembering her, the story shifts from one of abstract legacy to one of real consequence, grounding the narrative in the reality of what was lost. Looking back, there is a sense that the full truth about Phil Spector is not just darker than previously understood, but more complex. It is not a single revelation, but a layered understanding that continues to evolve as new perspectives emerge. Each piece of the story, his rise, his relationships, his behavior, and his ultimate downfall, adds depth to a portrait that resists simple interpretation. It is a story that demands nuance, that challenges easy conclusions, and that forces us to confront uncomfortable realities about the nature of talent, power, and accountability that in the end, what remains is not just a story of a man, but a reflection of the systems and attitudes that allowed his behavior to persist for so long. It is a reminder that brilliance does not excuse harm, that success does not negate responsibility, and that the truth, no matter how difficult, must eventually be faced. His legacy, complicated and unresolved, serves as both a warning and a lesson, one that continues to resonate far beyond the confines of the music industry. And so, as the echoes of his work continue to play and the debates surrounding his life endure, the story of Phil Spector stands as a powerful and unsettling testament to the duality of human nature. It is a story that refuses to fade quietly, one that lingers in the cultural consciousness, challenging us to look deeper, to question more, and to recognize that sometimes the truth is not only darker than we imagined, but far more revealing than we ever expected. That as we continue to examine the life of Phil Spector, it becomes increasingly clear that the darkness surrounding him extends beyond a single event or period. His story is a cumulative one, built from decades of erratic behavior, obsession, and control, each chapter adding to a portrait that is as disturbing as it is compelling. Those who work with him recall an unpredictability that could shift a creative session into a tense and even threatening environment, revealing a volatility that often lurked just beneath the surface of his public persona. What had once been tolerated, or even celebrated as artistic genius, now, in hindsight, appears as an early indicator of the dangerous patterns that would define the latter part of his life. His relationships, both professional and personal, were often shaped by a need for dominance. Accounts from artists, friends, and associates illustrate a man who wielded control not just over his music, but over those around him. For many, the thrill of working with Spector was coupled with fear, creating a paradoxical dynamic in which brilliance and menace existed side by side. The story of Ronnie Spector provides one of the clearest examples. A young artist trapped in a web of manipulation and isolation, her voice and career shaped by a man whose obsession with power often eclipses appreciation for talent. This duality, genius intertwined with darkness, would ultimately become a defining characteristic of his life and legacy. The murder of Lana Clarkson acted as a catalyst, forcing the world to confront the reality that Spector's darkness was not just psychological or contained within the music industry. It was lethal. The details of the trial expose a chilling pattern of behavior, underscoring that the volatility, manipulation, and controlling tendencies that had been dismissed or minimized for years were far from benign. Testimonies painted a portrait of a man whose obsession with control and perceived power escalated into actions with permanent consequences, confirming suspicions that his personal life was far more dangerous than anyone had fully realized. The conviction in 2009 marked a turning point, but it did not simplify the narrative. Spector's influence on music remained undeniable, and his contributions to the art form continued to be recognized. Yet this acknowledgement existed alongside the understanding that his creativity was inseparable from a life marked by fear and harm. It prompted difficult questions. How do we honor innovation when the innovator is also responsible for destruction? Can